You've seen the movies. You know the image. Tall, blonde warriors with horned helmets sailing dramatic longships. Brave adventurers exploring new lands. Fierce but honorable fighters with a code of their own. That image is not wrong. It's just incomplete. Because the part they don't show you, the part that made all of Europe drop to its knees in terror for 300 years, had nothing to do with honor. It had to do with what happened to the people who were home when the longships arrived. This is what Viking raids actually looked like. To understand Viking raids, you need to start where they started. June 8th, 7 nighttime AD. The island of Lindisfarne off the northeastern coast of England. Lindisfarne was not just any island. It was one of the holiest sites in all of Christendom. The monastery there had been a center of Christian learning for over a century. Monks had spent generations producing illuminated manuscripts, preserving knowledge, building something of genuine cultural value. On that morning, ships appeared on the horizon. The monks had no warning, no time to flee. By the time anyone understood what was happening, it was already over. The Chronicle of Simeon of Durham, written later from earlier sources, describes it like this. They came to the church, laid everything to waste with grievous plundering, trampled the holy places with polluted steps, dug up the altars and seized all the treasure. They killed some of the brothers, took some away in chains. Many they drove out naked and loaded with insults. Some they drowned in the sea. Alcuin, a scholar at the court of Charlemagne, wrote letters after the raid. The shock in his words is still palpable over 1,000 years later. He called it something that had never been seen before. A violence so sudden, so total, so completely without warning, that the Christian world genuinely didn't know how to process it. Lindisfarne was not an isolated incident. It was an opening move. Here's something that most people don't think about. Why monasteries? The popular answer is treasure, gold, silver, religious artifacts. And that's true. Monasteries were wealthy and relatively undefended. But historians have uncovered a second reason that is far darker. Monasteries were full of educated young men, literate, healthy, and valuable. Research suggests that one of the primary motivations behind Viking raids on monasteries was specifically to capture these men, to be sold as slaves in the East. The Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate had a specific demand for a particular type of slave. The Vikings, through their extensive trade networks stretching from Scandinavia all the way to the Black Sea and beyond, were positioned to supply that demand. Children were also taken. Women were taken. An Irish chronicle from 821 AD describes a Viking raid near Dublin in which they carried off a great number of women into captivity. The longships didn't just carry warriors home, they carried people. Slavery was not a side effect of Viking raids. For many expeditions, it was the entire point. For almost 300 years, from 793 to the late 11th century, Viking raids reshaped the entire map of Europe. This was not occasional violence. This was a sustained, systematic campaign that touched virtually every coastline in the known world. Wherever a longship could reach, and longships could reach almost anywhere, including rivers far inland, the raids followed. The city of Nantes in France was attacked on a feast day in 843. The Vikings waited until the city was full of people celebrating in the cathedral. Then they struck. The bishop was killed at the altar. The congregation was massacred or taken as slaves. Paris itself was besieged, twice. The first time, in 845, the Frankish king paid an enormous ransom of 7,000 pounds of silver and gold just to make them leave. The Vikings took the money, and then raided several more towns on the way home. The second siege of Paris in 885 lasted over a year, an entire city held hostage. These were not random acts of violence. They were calculated economic operations, run with extraordinary efficiency. Let's be specific about what a Viking raid actually looked like on the ground, because the reality was very different from what popular culture suggests. The longships could carry between 40 and 100 warriors. They were designed to beach directly on shore, no port needed. The Vikings could go from ship to land in seconds. Speed was everything. Hit fast, take everything, leave before any organized defense could arrive. Villages had no warning, no standing army, no police, no way to call for help. By the time word reached the nearest lord or king, the raiders were already gone. What they left behind depended on what they found. If a settlement cooperated, they might take the valuables and leave the people. If there was resistance, any resistance, the response was overwhelming and merciless. Buildings were burned, livestock was slaughtered or taken, food stores were emptied. Anything that couldn't be carried was destroyed so it couldn't be used by anyone else. And then the ships were gone, back across the water, loaded with silver, gold, livestock, and people, before anyone could mount a response. Entire coastal communities in Ireland, England, and France were abandoned during the Viking Age. People simply stopped living near the sea. The psychological impact of raids that could come at any moment with no warning and no defense changed where and how people were willing to live. The part of Viking history that almost never gets discussed in popular culture is the scale of the slave trade they operated. Slaves, called thralls in Old Norse, were one of the most valuable commodities in the Viking economy. Estimates suggest that slaves may have comprised as much as 10% of the entire population of Viking-era Scandinavia. That means 1 in 10 people living in the Norse world was someone who had been captured and enslaved. The trade routes were vast. Viking slave markets operated in Dublin, in Hedeby, and in cities across the Baltic. From there, slaves moved east and south, through Russia, across the Black Sea, into the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. An Arab geographer writing in 977 AD documented a Viking slave trade that stretched from Spain to Egypt. These were not abstract statistics. These were real people, monks dragged from their churches, farmers taken from their fields, children separated from their families, fed into a commercial network that stretched across the known world. The romantic image of Vikings as noble warriors exploring new lands exists alongside this reality. It is the same people, the same ships, the same journeys. Here is what I think is most important to understand about the Viking Age. The Vikings were not uniquely evil. They were not monsters from another world. They were people operating within a system that rewarded raiding, economically, socially, politically. A chieftain who came home with silver and slaves was powerful. A chieftain who didn't was not. What made the raids so devastating wasn't just the violence, it was the unpredictability. You could not negotiate with them before they arrived. You could not fortify against an enemy that appeared from the sea with no warning. You could not sleep soundly within reach of a navigable river. For 300 years, that fear defined daily life across most of Europe. Churches built walls. Kingdoms reorganized their entire military structure. The feudal system itself was partly a response to the need for local lords who could defend local people, because no central government was fast enough to stop a Viking raid. The longships changed the world. That is the history of Viking raids that doesn't make it into the movies, and it is far darker than anything shown on screen.